everyone, this is Amanda at Amanda's Booktopia. If you're new here, welcome, and if not, welcome back. And today I'm going to go over all the books I have read in the month of February, which is actually more than I expected to read in a month, especially a short month. I mean, we had Leap Day this year, so I was able to, even though we had 29 days in February, I read a lot of books. So we're going to go right into the books, and the first one that I started with was actually an audiobook, and that is Real by Kennedy Ryan. That is a romance with, it's mostly about this girl who gets accepted to play the starring role of this movie, and there's a romance between the star and the director. And it was outstanding. It had disability rep in it. And I enjoyed every moment of that book. I only had one issue with the sister. And that part irritated me a little bit. However, I still gave it a 5-star rating just because it was such a touching story, and the representation of the disability of lupus was top-notch, and the romance was incredible, and the way the director, his name's Cannon, treats Neva, who's a star, my god, he's like the most perfect partner. He's one of my favorite romance heroes that I've read so far, so it was a definite 5 stars. And then the next ebook I read was 20 Years Later by Charlie Donnelly, or is it Leah? I'm not sure. But I read this for Thrills and Chills, which is a book club hosted by Dana from Dana Ella and Nikki from Nikki's Bookish Coven. 20 Years Later was their pick for the month of February, and I had some issues. It started out okay, and then it just kind of, for me, went downhill from there. And unfortunately, I gave it 2.5 stars. I had lots of issues. Let me tell you what I wrote in my review on Goodreads. I said, the first half had me in a chokehold. I couldn't put it down, because the beginning part was pretty good. And then the last half, for me, kind of left me disappointed. There were so many plot holes and things that weren't necessary to the main plot. The epilogue was the best part of the whole book. I'm bummed I didn't love this since it has so much potential, because it really did have potential, and I just feel like it didn't reach that potential. It just felt very, for me, a bit anticlimactic, and then there were the couple of the twists that they had, for me, just came out of nowhere. Like, it was not meant to be part of the book, in my opinion, because it made no sense to the main plot whatsoever. And there's a tiny bit of romance in this book, and I had issues with that as well. I felt like the romance was absolutely not needed whatsoever. I just felt kind of let down, and I expected so much more, so I was a little bit disappointed with that one. So I don't know if I'm going to try that out there again. Maybe I will, just to make sure it wasn't like a one and done type of thing. Maybe I'll try one more just to make sure. And then, let's see. My next ebook was In a Holidays by Christina Lauren. It's a short little romance with the Groundhog Day trope. And it was definitely a decent story. Gave it 4 stars. And it was, I mean, it was a pretty decent romance. I'm not saying it was bad by any means. Just, it didn't blow me away. But it was a good story, nonetheless. I mean, it's a pretty short book. It's like a little novella. I think it's like a novella, basically. I'm not sure if my battery's about to die. I guess we'll find out. And then the next ebook I read was The Immortal Games by Annalise Avery. And what do you mean I read 2 times? Weird. I'm not sure why it says I read it twice. I don't remember reading it. I think I only remember reading it once. Weird. But it's basically about this 17-year-old girl who is seeking revenge on the gods for allowing her sister to die in the games. It's like, because the gods of Olympus, they randomly select humans as your tokens and then gamble with their lives. So it's kind of like, very much similar to the Hunger Games, but with gods. And they're controlling their human tokens. And, you know, they could throw a defense in their way. They could throw an offense. They could give them an advantage. There's all kinds of things they could do with them. And so there's also a bit of a romance, which I thought wasn't really necessary, because the rest of the story would have been so much better if the romance was not even involved. And I felt like the romance kind of just came out of nowhere. Like, it wasn't necessary to the plot, because the book would have been much better if there was no romance in it, I feel. There was because the god who selected her, Hades, well, it says, well, it doesn't say, like, who she ends up with, but it just, I won't spoil it because I don't want to give away anything, but I just felt like the romance was so out of place. It was not needed. It would have been much better if it was just, you know, a normal story, Hunger Games-esque, and it would have been just fine. But because of the romance that I didn't think was necessary is the reason why I gave it 3 stars. But the rest of it was decent. And then the next ebook I read was That Is a Fiction Writer by Gillian Cantor. I ended up giving it 3 stars. It was okay. It was decent. It seemed like a fan fiction based off of Verity by Colleen Hoover. It's very similar in a lot of ways, and it made me feel like it was kind of like a fan fiction with a different kind of ending than what I was expecting. I was hoping to be like this huge climactic ending with like, where did that come from kind of vibes, kind of like Verity. However, it left me feeling a little disappointed. It was very lackluster, the ending for me. So it wasn't what I expected, and not the best way. So it was okay. So 3 stars. And then the last ebook that I read in February was Defiant by Brandon Sanderson. It's the last book currently out from the Skyward series, which I absolutely love the series, so I was so excited to finally read Defiant. And I'm so glad I did, because I really enjoyed it. It's a really good series for those who haven't read the Skywards books by Brandon Sanderson. I haven't read any other Brandon Sanderson except for that series. But I really, really enjoy every moment from each of the books. And Defiant was just as good. Personally, I think the first book is my favorite out of all of them. But Defiant was still a good story. I really enjoyed it. And there was stuff I was not expecting. And I really had a great time with it. And I ended up giving it 4 stars. I finished it right before the month ended. So it was one of my last books of February. It was a great book to end with because, well, it's a great series all in all. So I really had a good time with it. And so that is all the ebooks and audio that I read for the month. And now we're going to go into the physical books, which I have right here next to me. And I pretty much killed my TBR. Not only did I add some of the extras that I've just told you about, I've also added some physical extras. And I crushed my TBR. I read every single book I planned on reading for the month, including more. So let's go over all those. One of my extras that I added on was Trial of the Sun Queen by Nisha J. Tooley. I absolutely adored this book. This was so much fun. It's about this girl named Lore who was thrown into this prison when she was a child, and she didn't know why because she didn't do anything, but she got thrown in there with her brother and sister who did do something. And then someone finds her and takes her back to this palace, and she has to fight in these trials to so she could end up being the Sun Queen in the end. So it definitely gave me like vibes of a little bit of the Hunger Games, but a lot also similar to Harry Potter, because like in Harry Potter, when he does a Triwizard tournament, some of these tasks are very, very similar. So I really had a good time with it. I had so much fun and it was just a blast. I got through it in no time. So I ended up giving it 4 stars. I really enjoyed it enough that I already bought the second book of the series. So I am excited to continue the series. And, well, I can't wait to see where it goes. I already have predictions of what's going to happen. So we will see how it goes. I am very excited to read the second book of the series. And next book, this was actually a Raymond pick. He wanted to pick a book for me to read for the month of February. So he picked for me The Assassin's Blade by Sarah J. Maas. This is the only Sarah J. Maas book that I have not yet read, except for that Catwoman book. I don't know if I'll ever read that, because I don't know if I'm going to like it. Because A Throne of Glass by her is my favorite series of all time. And this is the only book in the series I have not read. So Ray and Dana both encouraged me to read this book. So thank you to both of you because I needed to. And just by reading this, I have so much more understanding of the main character and got some more backstory from her, stuff of which I had no idea about. So it was really fun. I enjoyed all 5 of the stories that are in this book. My favorite one, I think, was probably the 3rd story, where she's in the desert. That one was my favorite out of all 5. But I did tear up a little bit in some places, because this is a 5-star series for me, so of course this one was an obvious 5 stars. So, really enjoyed it. So glad I finally read it. And then I also have books that I read for 72 hours in the reading vlog. In the 72 hours in the reading Nook. I made a whole vlog on it, and it's on my channel. I will link it down below where you could see more of my thoughts as I go along. So I'm not going to do too many like deep dive into these books, mostly because I already did a whole vlog on them. But I will give you a brief idea. So these 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So there's 5 books that I decided that I actually ended up reading for the whole 72 hours. It was Thursday to Sunday, 6 p.m. to 6 p.m. and I managed to read 5. So that's great. So I would definitely go ahead and check out that reading vlog. I will link it down below so you could go ahead and hear all my deep thoughts and everything on it. I'll just show you which ones I have read in case you haven't watched the vlog yet. So I read The Never Came by Nikki St. Crow. This was a very fast-paced read for me because it's so short. And I enjoyed it. Gave an easy 4 stars. I have heard really bad things about this one too. It wasn't that bad in my opinion. At least for me personally. But it was fun. I definitely am interested in checking out the next book in the series just because I want to know what happens next. And then the next book I read in that 72 hours is Desperate Measures by Katie Robert. I love Katie Robert's writing, and I thought this would be a great addition for that 72 hours. Had a good time. I'm not going to tell you everything. It's basically like a Aladdin retelling with Jafar as the main love interest. Like it's all about the villains in this series. This is a wicked villain series, so the villains end up finding love, which is interesting. This was definitely an interesting book. Gave it 4 stars. Basically, this is probably going to be the month of 4 stars, because I gave a lot of 4 stars in the month of February. And then another book I read in that 72 hours was Every Heart a Doorway by Shawnee McGuire. This is the first book of the Wayward Children series. I've heard amazing things, so I decided to give it a shot. It was interesting, to say the least. The first little bit, I was very confused, and then the last half was so much better. So I ended up giving it 4 stars. Again, another 4 star. And then another book I read in that 72 hours is There Are No Saints by Sophie Lark. This ended up also being a 4 star. I enjoyed it. There's one scene in particular that really bothered me, which I talk about more in depth in my 72 hours in the Reading Nook vlog, but it was a fast-paced read. I was able to get through it in no time. So yeah, 4 stars. And then this book was also included in that vlog, even though it was kind of sorta in the 72 hours, but not quite. They started it before the 72 hours started, except that they said you could use it for 72 hours if it wasn't more than 50% into it. So at the time, I wasn't yet at 50%. Well, but I was close to 50%, but not quite. So I was able to use it for the 72 hours. Sorry, I'm fixing my books over here. So I was able to fit it in since I wasn't close to halfway through yet. So that is The Predator by Rue Nix. Absolutely loved it. Tristan Kane has my heart. Just like Dom from The Ravenhood. And it was an easy 5 stars on this one. I already bought the second book and I'm excited to read it. So hopefully I'll be able to get to the next book, which is The Reaper, very soon, because I really want to read it. And those are all my add-ons that were not included in my original TBR. So that's 6 books just from that. Plus, the 1 audiobook and the ebooks were all extras. Well, actually, no. Kind of was. Well, the 20 Years Later and Real were for book clubs, but the rest were pretty much add-ons. Now we're going to get to my main TBR, and I read them all. Literally, all of them. However, there were a couple of DNFs, unfortunately. So let me talk about those. I DNF'd The Court of Miracles by Kester Grant. I really was liking it at first, but it started dragging and it got so slow. I was so disappointed because this is supposed to be a retelling of Les Miserables, and it's one of my favorite musicals. And I so badly wanted to love this. But like when I was getting to the halfway point, it just felt like a chore to keep picking it up, and I did not want to because it was so slow. I was so bummed because it's a great musical. If you have not yet seen it yet, I recommend checking out the Anne Hathaway version of the movie because that is the best version by far. I mean, she brings out tears and all the feels, so I highly recommend checking out the musical. This, unfortunately, I would not recommend. It was very long and slow, and I just got tired of trying to keep picking it up, and it was a chore. I couldn't do it anymore, so I had to DNF it, unfortunately, which is very sad because I really wanted to like it. And the next book that I ended up DNFing, which is very unfortunate, was Never by Jessa Hastings. This is another retelling of Peter Pan, and I so badly wanted to like this. I should have listened to you, Karina. I am so sorry. But I hated these characters so much. I mean, I tried to give it a chance. I got 100 pages in, and I couldn't do it anymore. I just couldn't. And I was very nervous about reading this one because I picked this as an intimidating read for my TBR for February. and I DNF'd it. It was not for me. I just could not stand the characters. The characters were driving me nuts. I'm like, what are you doing? Like, some of these characters were so unlikable. I'm like, I couldn't do it. So, I DNF'd it, unfortunately. Let's get to the books that I did not DNF and actually finished. So, the next book I picked up was Divine Rivals by Rebecca Ross. This has been making its rounds on Book Talk, Bookstagram, BookTube, everywhere you can name. This has been going around like wildfire. And I can see why. Because it was very romance heavy. And a lot of people love romance. And don't get me wrong, I do love a good romance. I really did enjoy this book. However, it was lacking the historical and fantasy elements that it needed. There was a little bit that was told through dialogue about a little bit of the history with the gods. And it felt a little bit info dumpy, and unfortunately it was mainly focused on the main character's romance. And I mean, don't get me wrong, it was a good story. I really enjoyed the romance, but I really wanted more historical and fantasy elements, and it just wasn't there. So I was very disappointed with that. I ended up giving it 4 stars just because I did really enjoy the story, but I was just disappointed there wasn't more fantasy and historical stuff in this, because it's been tagged basically like it's supposed to be historical, fantasy, romance. So it's supposed to have all 3, not just romance. And I just didn't get that. I just didn't get those elements, unfortunately. So that was a bit of a bummer. That's the only reason why it wasn't a 5-star. If it had more fantasy and historical in it, it probably would have been a 5-star. Just wasn't quite there. But I did enjoy the story enough that I decided to get the second book from Book of the Month. So that will be my Book of the Month box for March, because I want to know where the story goes. Hopefully the second book has more historical and fantasy in it. If you haven't already read Ruthless Vows, please tell me it has those elements, because if not, I'm going to be a little bit disappointed. But it was still a decent story. I enjoyed the interactions with Roman and, what's her name? Iris? I think that's her name. Am I really that forgetful? Yeah, it's Iris. So yeah, I mean, it was interesting. I am definitely looking forward to see where the story goes. And then another amazing book I absolutely loved was 5 Years From Now by Paige Toon. This is the second book that I've read from her, and her most recent. Absolutely loved it. So we go back and forth with Nell and, it's supposed to be Vian. Vian is, I think, is how you pronounce his name. But in the blurb, she spells it wrong. In the blurb, she calls him Van, V-A-N. But in the story, it's spelled V-I-A-N, and it's pronounced Vian. So that's a little bit misleading. I thought his name was going to be Van. Unfortunately, Van's just a nickname. I really, really love this story, though, regardless of that. It was so realistic, so heartbreaking, so, like, almost to the point where, like, you're rooting for them to get together. It's like every 5 years they manage to meet up. Well, you get snippets back and forth. It goes from then and now, from, like, Nell's point of view mostly. And you read the story from her perspective. And the way it ended was not at all what I was expecting. Not at all. And it was, I've never read a book. I mean, I love Paige Toon's writing because I've never read a romance that's so realistic. Like, it feels like it could be real life. Like, an actual person's life. And it feels so real. And you really, the characters, they're so, like, I could feel myself, like, in the story with them. Like, I was there for them all the way through. Like, they're so relatable and so easy to get to know, and the way she writes characters and their thoughts and feelings is outstanding. I need to read more of her books because I have loved everything that I've read from her so far. I need to read more from her because she's probably going to be one of my favorite romance authors of all time. So I definitely need to read more of her books. She will be going on my wish list right away for the ones that I have not yet read, because besides this one, I read one other one from her. I can't remember which one that was. Shoot, I can't remember. Oh, Only Love Can Hurt Like This was the other one. And that one and this one are absolutely incredible. So real. I mean, they're just... it's so hard to describe how much I love her writing, and the way she writes is amazing, and her characters, they do so much growing up and then they realize their mistakes, and it just feels real, and that's one of the reasons why I love her so much. So I will definitely be reading more from her, hopefully very soon, because this was incredible. Highly recommend. And then another book that I also read was House of Flame and Shadow by Sarah J. Maas. This was 835 pages. And I did like it a lot at first, and then the more I discussed it with my friends, and I did a whole live show based on just this book. I will also link the live show that I had with my friend, awesome friend Dana, down below, so you could check out all of our thoughts on this book. So I'm not going to go too in depth on this right now because I already have the live show. So please, I'll link it down below so you can all see all of our actual responses and everything towards this book. It was something. I originally gave it a rating of 4 stars, and I ended up dropping it down to, what was it, 2.5 stars maybe? Somewhere down below. Pretty far down. To me, this was her weakest book that I've read from her so far. However, if there's another book in the series, I will read it. And then the next one I've read was Butcher and Blackbird by Britton Weaver. This was something. A lot of the stuff that happened in this book, it gave me Criminal Minds vibes, very much so, but from the killer's perspective. Because for those, I mean, this is making its rounds on Book Talk, BookTube, Bookstagram, and it already has the second book coming. So, I mean, I'm sure a lot of people already know what this one's about, but if you don't know, it's about these 2 serial killers that work together, and they fall in love, and it's their romance, and it is something. There's so many like trigger warnings in this book, but for me, I didn't get all those. Like in the story itself, it wasn't nearly as bad as I thought it was going to be, because the trigger warnings made it sound so much worse. But when I actually read it, it wasn't even close to being that bad. So I don't know why there's so many trigger warnings. Maybe because they're killers and they kill. But the only scene that bothered me was like the very first few pages. But other than that, it wasn't really too bad. So it was like a Criminal Minds with a rom-com type of twist, I guess you could say. And it was definitely interesting. It was definitely not a 5-star by any means, because it wasn't like it blew me out of the water. And the end, not quite what I thought was going to happen. I was hoping for something more... I mean, it wasn't a bad ending. I mean, there was a twist I did not see coming. I just wish there was more to it, because it just seemed so simple the way it was resolved. I wish something more had happened. But it was still a good story. Gave it 4 stars. There's a lot of 4 stars for the month of February, let me tell you. But this is one of them. I mean, I might pick up the second one when it comes out just to see like if the second one's better. Not that this one is bad, just wasn't my favorite. Maybe I might end up unhauling this, not because it was a bad book, but because I don't feel like I'm gonna need to reread this again. But when the second book does come out, maybe I'll just get the ebook, because I don't feel like I need to own a physical copy anymore now that I've read it. I mostly just got it because it was an add-on and everyone's been saying how great it was. So I felt like I needed to know what the hype was about. 4 stars is not a bad rating though. And then we have the last 2 books. So let me talk about this one book before I get to the last one. The last one was my favorite of the month. Probably going to be for the whole year as well. But before we get to that, I want to talk about this one, which is Fireblood by Ellie Blake. This is the second book in the Frostblood series. I read Frostblood, I think it was back in January? I'm pretty sure. Yeah, and I really loved the first one. And then I picked up this, Fireblood, to read for February, and I really enjoyed it. However, there was one part that bothered me slightly. The only thing that bothered me, I think, was one of the characters. Ruby had to run to this other country basically to learn how to master her powers, and the guy she was hanging out with in that country, I think the author was trying to throw a slight love triangle in it, and I felt like it just didn't work. I don't think it needed that, having a little bit of a love triangle going on. I just felt like it wasn't really needed. It wasn't necessary, to the plot as a whole. It could have just been they were just friends, which I would have been fine with. I just don't think it was necessary to throw it in there. I mean, that's my personal opinion. But I still really enjoyed this. So I definitely gave it a 4 stars and I'm excited to get to the last book. The last book is Nightblood. And I want to know how it all ends. So I will definitely read the third one. Not sure when, but maybe this month, because it definitely can work for Realmathon. It has the red cover and it has blood in the title, which is great because I'm in the realm of blood and we could use team-related words in the title for bonus points. Well, yeah, for points. So I might be able to get to it hopefully maybe in March for to finish out the series, and I think it would work very well for Realmathon, so we'll see how it goes. And then the very last book has become my favorite probably of all time, if not this year. This book is outstanding. Okay, so this is my buddy read that I had with Laura from Days with the Doyles, and we both absolutely loved it so much. The both of us. And that is Breed Me Your Midnight by Rachel Griffin. And oh my god, this book was absolutely incredible. It's probably the most heartbreaking, heart-wrenching, all the feels, all the action, everything. The writing is absolutely beautiful. The way Rachel describes things in this book was amazing. I don't know how she does it. I have another book by her on my shelf, The Nature of what's it called? The Nature of Witches, I think it is. So I'm definitely gonna have to read that book because this was absolutely incredible. I have never read a book so I don't know how she does it. I don't even know how to describe it. It's just the best book I have probably ever read besides the Throne of Glass series. It was that amazing. And I'm not an annotator by any means. I don't like to write on my books. But if I was, there is so much in this book I would highlight and like write on the edges if I was an annotator. However, it really bothers me when people do that, so I'm not going to be doing it personally. But if I was, there's so much I would highlight. Like, it's not even funny. Like, everything in this book was absolutely incredible. It's a fantasy romance. And I don't even know how to describe this book. Like, seriously. The main character's name is Tana. I think that's how you pronounce that. And then she meets Wolf. And Tana's coven. So this is a witchy book. Just letting you know right now. This is about witches. And then Tana has one coven and Wolf has another. And Wolf is from a coven that practices dark magic. And Tana's practices lower magic. But then she meets Wolf. And things start happening. Like, it was amazing. I don't even know how to put it into words. How incredible and unique the story was. Like, the way she writes these characters is so realistic, and the way that their thoughts and feelings are, and like, the plot was incredible. I could not get enough. I read this practically in one sitting. I only put it down once because I had to, not because I wanted to. But wow, it packed a hell of a punch. I would recommend this to everybody who wants a good fantasy romance. The writing is so beautiful. The story, incredible. I cannot say enough great things about this book. Everybody needs to read it. So I highly, highly, highly recommend picking this up. If you want a good fantasy romance with witches, you can't look no further than this one right here. It was amazing. And that is all the books I have read in the month of February. Did you read any of these books? Did you like them? Did you not? Let me know all the things in the comments, because I want to know everybody's reactions. If you've read any of them, of course. If you have not yet read any of these, let me know which ones you're interested in reading. If you don't feel chatty for any reason, I guess give me a star emoji for how many 4 stars I had this month. And I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. If you did, give me a huge thumbs up. If you want to see more bookish content from me, make sure you smash that subscribe button down below. And I'll see you all next time.